How you doing, guys? I've talked a lot about all the different things you may need in a crisis situation, whether that's a small localized crisis like a hurricane, whether that's a huge shit hit the fan, economic collapse type situation. But there's one thing that I don't think I've talked about yet, and if I haven't, it may have only been mentioned briefly in passing. That's something that you really have to have that will, whether or not anything goes wrong, it's something that you really need to have just if times are good. It'll save you a ton of money. It will prevent you from having to pay people to do a lot of things. It will increase your skills in almost every area and just drastically increase the amount of things you can do for yourself. And that is this. And I'm not specifically talking about a claw hammer, but tools in general. And this is probably the first tool that most people have ever picked up when they were a kid or been given, would either be a hammer or maybe a set of screwdrivers. And I've managed to develop a pretty decent set of tools over the past few years. Nothing crazy, obviously, but it has really come in handy to just be able to go, oh, this needs tightening up or this needs fixing, and just be able to run out and grab the tools that you need. And I've compiled a list. It may seem pretty big at first, but it's really not when you consider all the various tools that are out there. I've talked before about the don't try to find a perfect solution. So don't worry about all the little tools like, oh, I may need a router, or oh, I may need a Torx bit or something like that. And I think I used a tool example in that video, and so now I'm doing a video just on the tools themselves. And the list that I'm about to give you will give you enough tools to figure out probably 90 to 95% of the issues that you'll come across. This list of tools I've put together is not huge, it's fairly basic, but if you get everything on this list, you'll be able to take care of at least 80%, maybe close to 95% of any issues that you'll come across in normal everyday life. Like, yeah, there's a lot of specialized tools out there that you'll need for specialized jobs, but when that comes up, you can deal with it. But these are just everyday around the house things, fixing things, tweaking things, and this should serve you really well even if nothing ever happens, but especially if stuff starts to get pretty hairy in terms of like economic collapse or hurricanes or anything like that. So starting from the beginning, I already showed you this one, claw hammer, very useful for actually nailing things, removing nails. You can use it as kind of a pry bar. I don't have to tell you what you can do with a hammer. And another one I really suggest having is a rubber mallet. I can't tell you how many times I've used a rubber mallet. Much better for adjustments than using a metal hammer. It won't like break or mar a lot of things that the claw hammer will. It's got a bigger end, so it'll diffuse the force. Great for like seating things properly, adjusting things, knocking things loose so you don't want to break them. So I'd recommend having a regular claw hammer and a rubber mallet. A set of screwdrivers, Phillips and regular, straight head or flat head. Everything up from the small ones all the way up through a bigger ones. And those are probably the thing that you're going to use more often than anything else is a regular set of screwdrivers. And they can be had pretty cheap. All this stuff you should look at garage sales and thrift stores. There's no reason to buy most of this stuff brand new. You could even talk to people and see if they're getting rid of it, you know, relatives and stuff like that. They'd probably be happy that you've turned into a real man and want the tools. And I recommend pliers as well, regular and needle nose pliers. Multi-tools are also great for this. A set of sockets. You want standard and metric. Some things have one, some things have the other, and they won't quite fit if you don't have the right ones. That's also can be had pretty inexpensively and used a lot of times. They'll last forever if you take care of them, but a good socket set is extremely useful. And adjustable wrench. You don't really, if you have a socket, you don't need to go buy a whole set of wrenches, fixed wrenches most of the time. It can be useful, but if you have the sockets already, maybe just buy a couple adjustable wrenches. Level is super useful, whether you're hanging pictures, putting a fence post in the ground or whatever, making sure things are where you need them to be and level. It makes a big difference and makes a normal sloppy job into something that looks professional. Tape measure, same deal. You want to make sure everything's working right. Making sure furniture that you bought or buying on Craigslist is going to fit in your house. Everything like that. Tape measure I've used more times than I can count. A builder square, one of those little metal triangles that you can use for lining up corners. Use it as a ruler. It has different angle measurements on it. Very useful. A utility knife, just like a regular box cutter type thing. Super useful. Obviously, if you have a ton of knives lying around the house, you could use those, but I wouldn't recommend using something like your everyday carry knife or a hunting knife for stuff like cutting cardboard or cutting carpet or just random things. You want a utility knife with some replaceable blades that you don't have to worry about doing those jobs with. Hacksaw is super useful, and you can get them. You can use those to cut all sorts of different things, from metal to PVC and sometimes even wood if you had to in an emergency. I would also recommend just a regular wood handsaw. Doesn't have to be huge, but just something that you can saw through a 2x4 or something like that. And I can get into power tools later, but just having one basic wooden handsaw is great. You can get tree limbs, or you can get a 2x4 or a piece of plywood with it. A chisel is great, and you can double it as a scraper. Just one basic one about 1 inch wide should serve you for most of your chiseling needs. Anything beyond that would just be specialized type instruments. So you can kind of, instead of getting like a scraper or putty knife, you can use a chisel for most of that too if you have to. And a set of Allen wrenches. A lot of furniture and things like that have Allen wrenches used to tighten them up, or the Allen type heads on the screws. Super useful. I've used Allen wrench a lot more often than you would think. They're very cheap. They're literally just a little L shape of metal, and you can find those all over the place. Shovel. Obviously, if you are in an apartment or something, this may not be as useful, but for anyone with a house or a backyard, just a regular shovel is super useful. It's going to come in handy for gardening, waste disposal, burying things that you don't want someone to find, any number of things like that. A shovel's super useful. And an axe, same with if you're living in an apartment or something like that, a regular axe is probably not going to be all that useful, but if you have any sort of property, planning on doing anything with wood or wood fires or cooking with wood, you're going to want to have a basic axe. And the last thing on my list is a crowbar or a small pry bar. You can use the claw hammer for most things, but it's really useful to have like a 8 or 10 inch just regular pry bar, because there's a lot of times that you just want to just pry on something or bash on something and you don't want to use a screwdriver or a knife because that'll break it, and you really just need to put some torque on something and bust it loose, and a pry bar is meant for that. It can take the abuse. So if you get this list of tools together, it doesn't even take up that much space. All the tools I mentioned can probably fit in like a suitcase type space, and you will be able to solve almost all your problems with that. You throw in some WD-40 and some duct tape, and you can fix pretty much anything that you'll come across in your normal day-to-day life, and that way you won't be calling people out there to tighten random things up, or just any random job around the house. And there may be situations where you can't just call someone. That's what we're preparing for. That's what all my videos are about. So taking a step to being prepared in this area by having a good set of tools will definitely help you if times get tough, or even if they don't, as the man says. So let me know what you guys think, and if there's any other specific tools that you would add to the list. Don't go anything too specialized, because like I said, we're talking about a 90% solution here. We're not trying to talk about every job that you'll come across, just a base set of tools that will serve you in the majority of situations. So take it easy, guys.